Now, one of the most basic requirements as an A-plus technician is going to be able to identify the major components in the system and to understand exactly what they do. And of course, we'll talk about this more as we get into the next chapter. In the next chapter, we're going to be dealing with hardware components, and so we'll actually, I believe, talk about just about everything on this list. So I'll be brief here, but the motherboard is the main circuit board on the PC. You see it there in the image. It's the large square circuit board with slots and sockets in the middle of that image. It's also labeled motherboard. So this provides data communication pathways, the different buses that are required to communicate from peripheral components and built-in components. The chassis is the actual computer case itself. Now, you might see it referred to as a case versus a chassis. The chassis is technically inside the case. It's metal, and we're going to secure the motherboard to the chassis. We're given pre-drilled holes and screws in order to mount the motherboard. The power supply, one power supply supplies power for the whole system. So you've got AC wall voltage going into that, and then the power supply is providing direct current power at 5, 12, and sometimes 3.3 volts. It'll supply power directly to the motherboard to allow for communication on the motherboard. Other devices like hard drives will need a separate power source plugged into them, optical drives as well. Sometimes video cards will require a separate power supply. So the power supply will have its connectors for each of those devices. CPU, the brains of the operation, in a chip that's installed into a socket in the middle of the motherboard. It also has heat sink and fans to pull the heat away. Those chips can get very, very hot, and so we need separate cooling mechanisms for the chip itself. The CPU is pretty much doing everything. Everything that happens on a computer is going to involve the central processing unit, so it's one of the more important components. A second very important component is going to be memory, which there are different kinds, and we'll talk about that in the next chapter, but the most common kind is just referred to as RAM, random access memory, and that is the kind that stores data temporarily. Now that's key, it's temporary. RAM requires power in order to retain the contents on the memory of data on the memory chip. So if you remove power, such as you reboot the computer, then you would lose the contents of memory. But when devices and programs are trying to communicate to the CPU, they're communicating through established ranges in random access memory. All right. And so just think of that as that temporary storage. Permanent storage is a hard disk drive. And now there are different kinds of hard disk drives. There's solid state, there's the magnetic, there are also optical drives, which are your DVD, CD, Blu-ray, etc. I guess those are the only three options really. But all of these provide a permanent type of storage. Hard disk drive is the main primary permanent storage on the system. If you want to save something, you're not saving it in memory, you're saving it to a hard drive. The amount of space that you have on the hard drive is going to determine the amount of data that can be stored there. Optical drives, yes, we can burn DVDs, CDs. That doesn't get done quite as much now as it did, 15 years ago when these devices were first coming out and everybody was burning everything. Optical drives, if they're even included in a machine these days, are typically just read-only. We're just reading a software program off of it. We're playing a music CD. We're playing a video DVD, etc. And then there are lots of peripheral devices, add-on video cards, add-on hard drive controllers, USB ports, maybe FireWire ports, maybe you got a PC, but you want a Thunderbolt connection because you got a bunch of Apple devices, those kinds of things. Anything that can be added to the computer, anything that's accessible outside would be peripheral. They are primarily going to be plugged in through the USB interface these days, and then that's also how they would communicate with the rest of the system.